All right, good morning. Who's feeling good? Who went to the party? Yeah. Who's a morning person? No. All right, we have some exciting content to get through. Thanks for joining me here early. This morning, my name is Kevin Rorty, and I'm a technical marketing engineer with Cisco's collaboration team. I specifically work on call control. So I cover communications manager, Expressway, VCS, and all sorts of things in between. The doors outside are a little confusing. You guys have probably already figured them out. This is the Cisco Expressway, the Collab Edge session. I think I tried to walk into the next door. I'm not sure what it was, but you guys are all in the right spot, I hope. So our abstract, there's a bunch up here. We are focusing primarily today on Jabber VPNless access. All right, that's what and we'll explain all the terminology and the evolution of the terminology, as it were, that you guys have probably followed along and tried to follow along and try to figure out what we're talking about. So we'll talk about what you can do with Jabber beyond the firewall without a VPN connection. This also applies, excuse me, to our telepresence endpoints, but the focus today is going to be definitely Jabber. We will do design guidance. We're going to start with some of the marketing slides. So it'll start pretty fluffy. We're going to cut through the naming conventions. We'll talk about licensing, scalability, those numbers. And then we'll start to get into design considerations and all the way down to, at the end, I'm sure you'll all be asleep, but we'll be talking about security, the SSL certificates you're going to put on your Expressway, right? These are some of the challenges, but we'll cover these details. If we look at our agenda, again, terminology introduction, some of the marketing stuff, mobile and remote access, we'll talk about what that means at a high level. Like I said, licensing, scalability, some of the product options. A big section in the middle there is that design and deployment considerations. We'll do a brief run through of the Expressway configuration, just so you guys can take that home. We've got some screen captures. That's a pretty quick section. We'll talk about what you need to do on the Unified Communications Manager side. There's not a lot you need to do, but there are some things you need to be aware of. Security, certificates, closing comments. There's an appendix with some content that I would love to cover if we get there. My gut tells me we're not going to get there, but let's jump right in. So, marketing slides, here we go. All these blue circles here, these are all aspects or components of Cisco's Collaboration Edge architecture. Now, we started talking about Collaboration Edge, a year ago, maybe longer, in some of these NDA type roadmap discussions, right? Collab Edge at that time meant one thing, specifically Jabber VPNless access. That term is pretty sticky. So it has stuck, but it has taken on a much broader role or broader significance, right? So next year, if you guys come here, we may still be talking about Collab Edge, but we may not be talking about Jabber VPNless access. We'll be talking about kind of the next generation and other things we've added to Expressway. So at the end of the day, some of these things are new. Some of these ways of connecting consumers, remote clients are new. Some of them we've had for years, right? Some of these gateways. If we highlight here, well, at the end of the day, it's all about, trying to figure out this slide clicker. Sorry. It's all about enabling any-to-any collaboration. Okay, so that's kind of the key aspect to our Collab Edge architecture. Now, if we take these blue circles and the ones we've painted green here, this is specifically what Expressway enables within that architecture. Okay, so Expressway is specifically for Communications Manager and our Business Edition deployments. It is based on Cisco VCS, also the former Tamberg VCS technology, right? It's based on today. It's the same exact software today. We differentiate it with licensing options. So when you order, buy, download Expressway, you're going to install it. It's going to look like a VCS until you turn it into an Expressway. So we'll talk more about that. But nice thing is the same software. If you're familiar with VCS, you'll be right at home with Expressway. If you come from the call manager side, don't worry about it. It's not bad. How many folks here come from the call manager background? Okay. How many are more traditional video, Tamberg VCS, Cisco VCS? Okay. So we got some overlap. How many customers in here? Cisco customers. All right. Cisco partners? Yeah, nice. I knew it. Cisco employees? Yep, cool. Good deal. Let me see you back there. That's helpful. Expressway is really an intersection of a lot of things, right? It's kind of the evolution of our integration between the Tamberg acquisition and what we've taken with their VCS product line. That's really powerful, especially from a firewall traversal perspective, and how we're integrating that with our communications manager, and moving all the call control to one spot. So it's the intersection of call control for video. It's where obviously how we're enabling Jabber. Simply put, it's connecting things on the internet to your communications manager environment and doing it with a secure firewall traversal approach. So, X81, anytime you see X81 for all the call manager background folks, this is the software. X is how we do VCS or Expressway software. So we're on X8.1 release. I think X8.1.1 is where we are currently. We have an X8.2 release coming this summer that's going to have some nice enhancements, enable Jabber guest, have some nice bug fixes you guys will be excited about. But anyways, with X8.1 is where we've introduced this new Expressway option. VCS obviously can use X8.1 as well. And from a VCS perspective, what we've done is we've really just brought you more features and more value to your VCS. All right, so if you're a VCS customer today, keep on doing what you're doing. The Expressway stuff may apply to you. We'll get to that in a little bit, kind of what having both of those deployments looks like. But again, Expressway is the focus, right? And this is Communications Manager customers, Business Edition customers, bringing secure firewall traversal to your deployments. For Jabber, for video, for CMR, right? Rowan announced CMR this week. All your on-prem endpoints going to the Cisco Cloud CMR through Expressway. The most helpful way I've been able to break down explain these product differences is this superset subset terminology, right? Superset does not exactly technically make sense, but the idea is VCS can do everything that the Expressway can do. All right, it's got the full capability set. Expressway is just the subset. We're not going to bring features to Communications Manager customers that they don't need and complicate things any more than you're already dealing with today. So, one key thing here. No licensing changes today, and we'll talk more about licensing in a minute, but no licensing differences for VCS. The way you've been buying that, licensing it, traversal, non-traversal, that all stays the same. The really cool thing about Expressway is this is, all Communications Manager 9.1 above customers are entitled to Expressway server software for free, right? It's a $0 order. You have to order it to get access to the option keys, release keys that you get. But it is free, and that's a huge benefit when you compare the bottom line when you're pricing out these two different solutions. All right, so let's go through the branding terminology. It's always a good sign. It's always a branding failure, unfortunately, when you have to explain the terminology. But so Collab Edge, it's the marketing umbrella term, right? It has evolved. We use Collab Edge as an SRV record, but really now today, this is the umbrella term enabling any-to-any collaboration. VCS, we have a VCS-C for control. We have a VCS-E for Expressway. We've carried that C and E forward. In this case, it's not the Expressway, although that sounds really good, I know. We have an Expressway-C, and we have Expressway-E. E, Edge, C, Core. I think that's pretty logical. Hopefully that makes sense. I end up a lot of times just sticking with the E and the C, because if I say Expressway, a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about, and that's unfortunate, but I think hopefully everyone's on board with this terminology. And then mobile remote access. This is what we initially started calling Collab Edge as a feature. This is Jabber VPNless access. This is how it's labeled in the product, in our docs. So MRA, you guys, not that I like to push new acronyms, but this one has started to stick a little bit. There's a question back here.
Yeah, if you're an owner of VCS, do you co-run both traditional video as well as your MRA on the same device?
Yes, you can. And I will give you more, sorry, the question was, can you do MRA on top of your existing VCS? You can definitely do that. And we have a slide later that kind of talks about those options, when you should do that and when you should consider deploying a standalone Expressway. So we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, is that helpful? You guys got the terminology down? All the slides basically are labeled, there's a couple exceptions, but they're all labeled Expressway. But every time you see that Expressway, if you're a VCS customer, don't worry, you can do that too, right? It's all there, but the new branding, everything is Expressway. The licensing really incents going that direction, and I think you guys get this. All right, so Jabber VPNless access, this is huge. This is the killer feature, right? Who's deployed this? Who's using it today? Awesome. Who's mastered this deployment? All the partners out there, who's mastered this? Nice, we got a couple hands up, I love it. All right, cool, we got a couple. This is the killer app. It's all about ease of use, right? From the end user perspective, enabling Jabber without a VPN, you don't need to think, do I need to turn on VPN? I don't need to worry about auto network detection, those things, those limitations. This is, you fire up Jabber, whether you're inside the network, outside the network, it knows how to connect. It's all based upon DNS records, right? And we'll talk more about how Jabber and service discovery works. And again, TC endpoints, right? So our telepresence endpoints that we've been registering to VCSE or internally to VCSC, now we can register those endpoints through the Expressway or through a VCS solution, but proxy that registration all the way through to Communications Manager, right? So this is enabling a simplified, centralized dial plan. Your URI, your phone number that you have on your Jabber client, on your IP phone, is now the same as what you have on your telepresence endpoint. We don't need to do find me, single number each, these sorts of things. It's all integrated, and this is a huge step forward for all telepresence deployments. Now, we've had AnyConnect for years, right? AnyConnect is not going away. These are complementary offerings. You guys know this. Idea with Expressway, it's session-based firewall traversal, only taking your Jabber traffic back through the enterprise, your Twitter, your Facebook, all the end users, all that other traffic you don't want to clog your access circuit with. It's not going through. We're just securing the application layer via TLS and SRTP. So this is a great option to have. In some circumstances, it makes sense. Personally, I use Collab Edge. My mobiles, tablet devices, right? I need to use a full VPN solution on my PC. That's just kind of the nature of my work. You guys are probably in the same boat. So complementary offering, you'll see them both in a lot of environments. A lot of excitement around Expressway for sure. So what can Jabber do? Not quite everything, but we'll still call it a fully featured client, right? So audio and video, obviously this has always been core. I'm in presence. This is really the new to Expressway, and we'll talk about how we enabled this. Searching corporate directory, kicking off a WebEx, who uses the Jabber visual voicemail. It's a pretty cool app, isn't it? I can't stand dialing into voicemail anymore. I have to use that. This is all enabled through Expressway beyond the firewall. So let's take a step back and let's talk about just a video deployment, right? And we're setting up here some understanding of how the Expressway and classically how VCS and VCS Expressway firewall traversal has worked over the years. So it's always a two-box architecture, right? We have this, it's a client-server relationship. Expressway C is the client, Expressway E is the server. This is, although people always want to have one box, why can't we move the Expressway C to call manager? Hopefully this slide will explain that. There are some really nice advantages from a security perspective of why we've gone with this two-box solution and how Tamberg over the years and how Cisco VCS has been so successful in going into just about any DMZ topology, not being dependent upon any particular firewall or any technology in a firewall, but allowing rich media video through the firewall. So Expressway E is the traversal server. C is the client. Connections are always established from the inside out. So this makes the firewall team happy, right? We don't need to open anything inbound on that internal firewall. Once we get this connection up from the C to the E, we're going to use a TCP, typical kind of keep alive mechanism to keep that up and running. once we have an inbound call, in this case, we have someone from the outside calling in, signaling's coming through here, the red dot, we're able to use that existing traversal connection to map that signaling into the Expressway C, right? So it hits, the signaling's able to find the E via typically like a DNS record, right? Resolves to, it's going to be SIP or 323 in this case, comes in on the E, pipes it over to the C, right, over this existing traversal connection. In this case, we have communications manager in the environment, so we route the SIP signaling to the communications manager, and then that connects to the endpoint. This, you guys get this. Now the next piece is media, right? We got a 200 okay. We need to send media back and forth. Again, the UDP connection is always from C to E, and then once E gets that connection, it's able to respond, and we're basically multiplexing media on these UDP ports, and that's how we're getting the connection through. So media and signaling are always coupled on the Expressway, right? We can't separate them. That's really the trick. You know, Ascent was the original protocol that was then ratified as H460.18 and 19. This is something that even before Tamberg had VCS, I forget the name of the company. Who knows it? Sorry? Ridgeway, thank you. I was going to say Ridgewater. That's like a community in my hometown. This is a killer solution for firewall traversal. The other key aspect, it's always inside out as far as the connection goes. We don't need to allow any other clients or anything else in the environment to talk to Expressway C from the inside to the DMZ, right? Different than other competitors' edge solutions, right? Everybody needs to be able to talk to the edge server with some of our competitors' edge solutions. In this case, we can really groom that traffic, only C to the E, okay? You guys get that? Make sense? Ascent was the initial protocol. That was ratified under the H460.18 and 19 as the standard, and that's specifically for H323. Ascent we apply to SIP. All right, question up here. Sorry.
So basically, they're really like the E is in reverse proxy and the C is proxy, and they swap spit together to get them where they need to go.
Yeah, so the question or statement is the E is kind of a reverse proxy, the C is kind of a proxy. We set up this traversal connection between one another. Once we have that link, they're able to map outbound anybody from the outside to the inside. So that's a good way of putting it. All right, so we take that existing firewall traversal two-box solution architecture, right? And here's what we've done in the X81 release. The first thing we did is we dropped the XCP router component from our present server on both the C and the E, all right? Same architecture. The C always initiates that connection, TCP 7400 to the E. This is going to enable, this enables your Jabber client on your mobile, right, to get IAM and presence message, XMPP messaging through the Expressway all the way back to your present server, all right? What we'll also enable very soon is XMPP federation, right? So since we have this XCP router, we're going to be able to do XMPP federation, giving your present server an option to talk to the outside world via XMPP. We already have a SIP option today through ASA and the TLS proxy. This is going to be a really nice option, especially if you're putting in expressways for MRA. You can leverage that also for XMPP federation. There's a question back here. Exactly. Yeah. So the XMPP federation, we'll have to open another port to the Expressway E, but you don't have to do any port forwarding to your present server. All right. So that's the first thing. We dropped in the XCP router. Number two, the reverse proxy. All right. So we actually have now an HTTPS reverse proxy on this box. So we haven't typically, in the past, the VCS has always been SIP 323, and then your media HTTPS is, of course, always part of, administrative GUIs, but the reverse proxy was required for things like configuration downloads, your TC endpoints, your telepresence endpoints, being able to pull firmware from your on-prem TFTP server through that proxy, right? Directory search, the visual voicemail, we actually have a slide that details how all the services map to these different components. But that's the other key kind of new software module that we have on the Expressway. And the folks out there that have deployed Jabber, you know that, Jabber fires up, it does a bunch of SRV requests, and then it's a lot of HTTPS before you ever see that SIP connection, right? It's HTTPS, 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 XMPP, and then SIP, right? So this is very important. You'll definitely figure that out as you deploy this. This is the key to getting things up and running. And then the other part we talked about, not really a software module, so to speak, but what we talked about earlier, proxying that SIP registration all the way through to Communications Manager, all right? Simplifying your dial plan, not having, dial plan on the VCS side and Call Manager, putting it all in Call Manager. So we'll talk more about these services and firewall ports later. There's a question here. What type of management? Like classic TMS? With Prime collaboration? The question was around adding management with Prime collaboration of the remote endpoints. There's nothing I can comment on today about that. I think you'll see Prime start to show up in Expressway soon as Prime kind of becomes our, as we like to say, our single pane of gas. Plane of gas? Pane of gas? No, that's here. Plane of glass. It's funny how that worked out. There's some things coming. There are some limitations. It's hard. You can't manage, if you don't have a layer 3 connection to a telepresence endpoint, there are some management limitations, So like a CVO type router, VPN router at a home office for executives and things like that, that becomes something that's a nice, it's not, obviously it's more expensive to roll that out, but that's nice for management capabilities. It gives you direct layer 3 access to that box or to that telepresence unit. CTI control, that is a limitation today. So the question is, when are we going to do CTI control? I don't know when. It's one of these roadmap things. There's a lot of things that we're trying to get prioritized. I don't think it'll happen this year, but it is something, especially as we start talking about remote contact center agents, right? They want desk phone control. Yes, it would be convenient if we did CTI, if we had VPN phones as well. I agree. It would be really cool to have that. There are some challenges, I think, with securing that connection. I think that's kind of the limiting factor today, but we are looking at how we can address that. All right. Boom. This slide is awesome. For a long time, we didn't have all these availables. It was always projected availability. As you can see from my header, I didn't update that. We have all these clients available now. Jabber for Windows, Jabber for iPhone and iPad, Mac, Android, and all the TC series endpoints. So it's pretty awesome. Obviously, IP phones are not on this list. There are some notable things missing, but we do have a wide spectrum of support for clients. X811 is what we want you to upgrade to. It's the latest version. That's where you get tax support and all that goodness for MRA. Communications Manager, 912 SU1 is what we have specifically called on the deployment guide. We're going to have an SU2 build available, I'm going to say a couple weeks, maybe even sooner. I'll say a month. Give me some room here. SU2 is going to have a couple fixes that today we have to add a COP file, and there's a slide later about that. But anyways, the tip of the 9.1 train, if you're on 10X, either 10.0 or 10.5, which we just released a couple weeks ago, that's got all the UDS enhancements, no COP file required. IM&P is always in lockstep with your communications manager as far as major minor versions. And then Unity Connection, really just for that RESTful interface for the visual voicemail access. That's an 8.6. We've had that for a while. You guys are probably way beyond that. The question was, if you load up 9.1, we're talking Communications Manager 9.1.2 SU2, you should no longer need that COP file. You do need the COP file for SU1 today. There's a couple fixes that didn't make it. Question over here. Can I elaborate on what? I'm sorry. Oh. Yeah, so SU1 delivered a bunch of UDS enhancements. There's a couple more that are going to be coming in SU2. The difference is provided by that COT file today. SU1 is also what TAC is going to want you to have for them to support your deployment, because that's like the minimum. That's, when we finally got all the clients and all the call manager and Expressway ready, SU1 was the version we were all testing with, so we want you to start there. You can do it on 9.1.2, but as soon as you go to TAC, one of the first things they might say is, let's get you to SU1. The DX units, they are not supported initially. The cool thing about the DX is they have AnyConnect, right? The DX has a killer video device, but it also can do a lot more, right? It's the whole desktop collaboration. If you're doing a lot more, AnyConnect probably makes sense, right? Because you have more traffic than just, SIP and Jabber and the voice and video. But we are looking to support those units, obviously, as, video endpoints through Expressway. All right. You guys, into the product lines, options, licensing, scalability. You guys saw this slide, right? We talked about superset, subset. It sets up this question, all right, what is that subset, right? So specifically, we've got a bunch of features here, what's supported where, on which product lines here, product line option. Telepresence device registration and provisioning is not supported on the Expressway, right? So we're registering everything to Communications Manager, so we don't have the SIP registrar or the 323 gatekeeper capabilities here, right? This is pushing all the SIP registrations through to Call Manager. Session management and call control, again, we've already got Call Manager for this. WebEx enabled telepresence. I just changed this the other day. Now, the key thing with WebEx enabled telepresence is in the past you've had to have that MCU or telepresence server registered or typically registered to your VCS. With the latest TMS and telepresence server software, you can now trunk that to Communications Manager for scheduled conferencing. And so that enables you to deploy Expressway for the firewall traversal part of the WebEx-enabled telepresence. Does that make sense? Also, if you have just a VCS, today you could do that. You could keep your bridge there and then use the Expressway for the firewall traversal aspect. So the strategic direction is definitely trunking your telepresence server to Communications Manager, but we know that we just released that, and it takes time for people to get there. There's a question back here. All right, so there was a question. I have a CNE, a VCS CNE today, and I'm registering endpoints there that I can't register to Call Manager. We have a lot of that, right? Once you upgrade, those endpoints still can register. You don't lose that capability, all right? Yeah, I know, good. You gain the capability of starting to move your other endpoints through, proxy them through, so you can kind of run the direct registrations as well as proxy the registrations all the way through to Communications Manager. There's a slide in the back here in the appendix that actually will walk you through kind of the touch screen on like an EX series, right? And how the provisioning looks different and how you would kind of choose the classic VCS versus the Expressway type. So, but yeah, you're not losing that capability. We're just giving you more features. There's a question here. We got a lot of questions showing up. All right. That's confusing. Yeah. Right. So specifically, yeah, and that's why we called them out on different lines. So the inner working is more of a trunk relationship, right? So if you're going to trunk over to Polycom, call control, link, things like that, that's what you can do on both boxes, either the Expressways or the VCS series. Specifically, device registration, not supported on the Expressways. Okay, yeah, thanks for calling it out. That is definitely why we separated them out, but people like to see that, stop there at that line and say, yeah, I'd like to do that and not read the rest. All right, one more question, then I got to go.
Just got a little confused though, because still registered? Are you referring to registered to the Expressway series?
No, we were talking VCS back there. So,
I thought he said that if he upgrades, meaning that he changes it over to Expressway series.
yeah, great point you just pull out there. So there's no migrating VCS C&E to an Expressway C&E. If you want to do Expressway, you're going to fresh install and start over, right? There's no reason you need to change it because your VCS can already do everything that an Expressway can do. You just need to keep upgrading software and going on and doing business like you have been doing, right? Now you just have more features. So there's no conversion from the VCS series to the Expressway series today. Just if you're starting with Expressway, you're going to be fresh installing, and we'll talk more about kind of that VCS and Expressway deployment. So the other thing we don't do on Expressway is the JITX support for any federal customers. Well, all right, one more question. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so the question is, can I go the other way around? Can I start with Expressway and change it to a VCS? The answer is no. Basically, once you start down that road, you're kind of in that licensing path. That's probably at the end of the day why we're not doing it, because it is the same software, but the licensing would get really confusing pretty quickly if you would try to convert. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. Now, more about licensing, my favorite topic. The cool thing here, and this is something that everyone needs to understand this and walk away here. When you're using this MRA feature, right, whether it's Jabber endpoints or TC endpoints or what other endpoints we support down the road, all these endpoints can register and connect through all those sessions, make calls without requiring any session licenses on the Expressway or the VCS for that matter, right? So you can deploy this feature in both places. There's no cost to deploy it on Expressway, right? $0 order, get your Expressway software that gives you the options or all the licensing you need. The licensing in this case that you would need is none of it's session-based, right? It's just the typical release key type things and some other options that we're throwing in. I'll cover that more later. The only time you need session-based licensing is if you're doing something, communicating with folks outside your organization, right? So the classic kind of business-to-business video case, right? Jabber Guest is a new feature coming out. That will require session-based licensing. Calls to the CMR, right? That's going to require session-based licensing. But again, nothing for MRA, right? The only time you need a session-based license when you're using MRA is if I place a call from my Jabber client and then a SIP, the SIP messaging gets through to call manager, it hits a SIP route pattern that points it back out on a trunk right back at the same Expressway or a different Expressway, it doesn't matter. And when it becomes a B2B call, that's when I need a session-based license, okay? The key thing with session-based licensing, well, we'll talk about it in a second. This talks more about how we're classifying that traffic. So this is the resource usage. We're calling these MRA calls unified CM calls. It's a fair name, not as catchy as some of the other names we've got, I'm sure. But so you'll see these calls noted here on the resource usage, and then we still have kind of the classic, traversal, non-traversal that we call the rich media calls, right? So we're breaking this out separate. Everything in the blue box you need to have session-based licenses for. Everything on top you don't. At the end of the day, these all require resources, right? So obviously there's still a physical capacity that we can only hit on that box. So we add those all up in the monitored resource count on the bottom. We'll get there in a second, Sam. Thank you. Question in the back. So there is no plan today, and we just covered this a second ago. If you have a VCS, you don't need to convert it to an Expressway, right? Because your VCS does everything that an Expressway does, right? There's no need to convert it. Yep, noted. Nothing today, I'm sorry. All right. We also have, this is a minor thing, but we have this new kind of flexible call licensing with X81. If the call turns out to be SIP audio only, basically you can kind of get 2 calls for the price of 1 rich media session. So anyways, this is a minor detail. You'll see this kind of play out here in the scalability charts. We have virtual options to deploy Expressway. We have new appliance options, right? These new appliance options, this is old school, right? This is rolling back the clock 7, 8 years. No virtualization. Kind of weird, right? UCS without virtualization. Specifically for customers who can't run VMware in the DMZ or people that want to sell them appliances, I guess. Anyway, a couple options. I noted the part numbers here. We have the 500, the CE500, and the 1K. We have the Expressway version, and then also the VCS options on the bottom, right? So you can, whether you're buying Expressways or VCSs, you can get these appliances either way, just a different part number. Question here on the appliances? Okay. Yeah, so you need, it's a hard cap on the session-based license. Yeah. Hopefully everybody got that. One more question back here, and I'm going to move on.
With respect to customers that can virtualize in the DMZ,
Yeah.
about coexistence, any concerns there?
Yeah, so some customers, typically the smaller customers, may want to do an Expressway C and the E on the same box, virtualize them, and then use VLANs and whatnot to take the E to the DMZ and keep the C on the inside. You know, that's completely possible. It's reasonable. In some places that doesn't fly, but yeah, if you can do it, it's worth a shot, just from a kind of a hardware perspective.
In these cases where you're not, I'm thinking outside of the actual C or E conversation where you just have other apps running standard platform from a generic.
Yeah, nothing I can think of that, yeah, it's completely possible to do this, but it typically doesn't fly in a lot of customer environments. Just, they like that physical separation a lot of times. So I definitely would encourage the virtualized deployment. It's a lot more flexible. It's hard to think about one application per box as we are in 2014 today, but this is an option we have. If you can, do it on virtual. The small OVA option, it's all one OVA. When you deploy it, you'll get a small, medium, large option. Small is for the business edition, 6,000 customers. Medium is basically the same kind of what we've been supporting for years with virtual VCS, and kind of maps to the same capacity as the old appliance. The large is new in X81. It is CPU heavy, but it's heavy because we can do 500 simultaneous video calls through it. And there's a lot of crypto required, because we're doing a lot of SRTP to RTP, and that's always a crypto-heavy function, a lot of CPU cycles. Now, if you take a look at this chart here, on the left-hand side, per server numbers, right-hand side is per cluster. For the most part, it's multiplied times 4. Where that doesn't hold is the small OVA case for the 6K, and that kind of is consistent with the rest of the 6K idea of clustering, right? You're not clustering for scale, you're clustering for redundancy. Now, the one detail I want to call out here is the audio video calls, right? So it's 500 for the large server, it's 500 video or 1,000 audio, it's not both. So you do 499 video calls, you can do 2 audio calls on top of that, right? The other key thing is because for years these have kind of been the numbers on the VCS, 100 video calls, right? We actually, as you see on the bottom here, you can actually go up to 150 video calls for MRA, right? This is because they're not licensed sessions, so we're not capping that like 100 traversal or 100 RMS count, because we don't need to buy session licenses. So if you are monitoring that resource usage, you'll see it go up to, the numbers only make sense if you're thinking 150 of the capacity. So 100 is good for planning purposes, but you can get 150 out of it. That's a great point. So the large option, one thing to note is we require the 10 gig interface for the large, right? Same thing for the CE1K. This is a 10 gig option. We actually will ship a 1 gig interface for the CE1000, but if you're only using the 1 gig interface, you're basically stuck with the medium, right? with the medium performance. So if you're doing large, you want to make sure you have a 10 gig network that supports it. Okay, so the rich media session. Sam, you had a question about this. And by the way, Sam, it's good to see you here this morning. I didn't think it was going to happen. He was trying to get me to drink some shots last night. No thanks. So rich media sessions, we have simplified this. We used to have to buy traversal and non-traversal, and you had to figure that out, right, when you're ordering, what do I want to buy? And we threw in 100 traversal by default on the control, VCSC. We've simplified it. You just buy one type, but the difference is you now need to buy one session for both boxes, right? So $750 a piece, I think, is list for an RMS session, but you need one on the C and the E, so it's like $1,500 list per session is what we're looking at. So that's a key thing to remember. You need to buy one for each, and it is a difference from kind of how we've sold this in the past. But hopefully it's simplified from the perspective of you don't need to differentiate between non-traversal and traversal. So again, not required for mobile remote access. It is required for B2B video, Jabber guest, any third-party video interworking you're doing. I think CMR is going to fall under the same, it's basically a B2B video call. So when you order the Expressway, the $0 Expressway, you get all of these option keys here in the orange highlighted box. Same thing if you order the non-$0 appliances, you get all these option keys. So we're giving you the advanced networking. That's the dual NIC/NAT option, right, for your Expressway E. We're giving you all the turn licenses you need. The traversal feature set is also, of course, included for the E. The interworking gateway. So this is if you're setting up expressways for B2B video and you want to be able to receive inbound 323, even though nothing in your environment does 323, you can interwork that from 323 to SIP on the edge. You can also interwork it if you need to on the inside on the C. Either way, we give you that in this case. Expressway rich media session really becomes the only session license that you need to add to your expressways, right? Only thing you need to consider about. And then, of course, if you're going to do Microsoft interop, we'll charge you a lot of money to do that.
So can you detail or hit the high points of what's in that Microsoft interop, or where somebody would want that?
Oh, high points of Microsoft interop? You would want that if you want to do video interworking between a Link 2013 and a Cisco video environment. Okay, and typically you're going to have expressways or VCS controls dedicated for that feature.
Okay, so if they have Link video.
Link 2013 specifically, it'll take Microsoft's SVC and we'll interwork it to our standards-based approach. Yeah, so dual NIC is what we've now are calling the advanced networking option. We used to charge for that in VCS Expressway. We still do, actually. We throw it in now with the Expressway. Turns out a lot of our customers need that. And it turns out there's been an issue in X8.1 with some of our customers doing that in force encryption. That will be fixed in X8.2. So hopefully a lot of the partners in here know what I'm talking about, and they're like, thank you. All right, we're good on licensing? Do we have more questions? We got one here. Yeah, so the cool thing about MRA, the question is, with VCS and control, do I need MRA licenses? You don't need any licenses, right? It's just a feature. You just enable it. So no option keys required. We've always kind of said it ties back to cool or UCL enhanced, but really that is just to align with where you're entitled to Jabber. At the end of the day, we're not tying today the expressways or the VCSs back to Prime License Manager, Enterprise License Manager, or anything like that. It's enabled. It's there when you enable it. No license required. Question here.
So regarding just the audio call itself from a Java client, it's going to make a phone call through the Java client through to the PFDN.
Yep.
Does that use up the license?
Okay, great clarification. I am a Jabber client. I want to do an audio-only call through the PSTN, and I'm connecting through Expressway using this MRA feature. There is no session requirement at all to route that call, right? Because it's not a B2B call from the perspective of it going back out the Expressway. And anything that originates on Jabber that's registered through the communications manager is not going to require a session license. Another question here.
Just, if you do have the traditional BCSB or CSE, do you need to get one of these rich media session licenses for Jabber?
So think of the rich media, the question was around rich media session licenses and the VCS Expressway. Think of the rich media session as a traversal license. And so we're kind of rebranding that, and we're also not selling non-traversal for Expressway. So you just need to buy traversal licenses on the VCS side. So nothing really changes as far as how we're licensing session-based calls through the VCS. All right, any other licensing questions? This is the last one I'm going to take. Awesome. Does it make sense? It's pretty damn easy from turning on MRA from licensing. You just need to make sure you order the $0 virtual option. We'll give you everything you need, and you're off and running. There's one more. Yeah, so the Microsoft interop license, we do have demo licenses available for that. Yeah, so they're time bound. I think we do 60-day license, so that's something you can try. I don't know if it's available any other way besides a demo or just buying it outright. I don't think it is. Okay, cool. I think we're past a lot of the marketing. We've cut through, you guys get it now, yeah? We're past the licensing. These are some, unfortunately, the larger technical challenges that we create. Let's get into some of the more of the technical protocol level stuff here. Service discovery. So Jabber, this is a simplified slide of service discovery. There's a lot more going on with service discovery. But basically, at the end of the day, Jabber is using DNS SRV records to figure out where it is with respect to inside the network or outside the network, and where it can connect to get services from, okay? Now, I'm showing these in this build sequentially. The reality is Jabber fires off all these SRV records immediately, right? And then it kind of waits and see what responses it gets back. So one of the high priority SRV records is the Cisco UDS record. This is never going to be in public DNS. If it is, Expressway MRA is never going to work. So we expect to not find that when we're in the internet. We do a lookup for collab edge. This is what we need in public DNS to find the Expressway. This will allow Jabber to resolve the Expressway that it's for its domain, set up an HTTPS connection to it, do, of course, our TLS handshake, cert verification, more on the cert stuff later. And then once we have this HTTPS connection up with the Expressway E, the first thing that we're going to request is our edge config. And by the way, also, I need that Cisco UDS record. Ask the Expressway C to resolve that UDS record on behalf of the remote client, but do it with internal DNS. All right? Once we send that request in, Expressway C is able to find the UDS record on the inside and have that connection through the communications manager. So this is simplified service discovery, but the two key records we need for Expressway MRA are Cisco UDS on the inside, collab edge on the outside. Now, if you have, and you should deploy a cluster of Expressways, each node in that cluster should have an SRV record associated with it, all right? The weight and priority will be respected by the clients. I don't think I've found a good reason today to weight or prioritize one record in a cluster higher than another. I think that would come in if you had multiple clusters serving the same population, the same kind of geographic region. So GeoDNS, I got a good slide on that later. This is an option, right, for using the same domain across the globe, but then basically having regional access, regional edge access. So again, UDS is only on the inside, collab edge is on the outside. That will get you to that'll tell Expressway how to connect. Collab edge tells it how to connect to the Expressways, Expressway E specifically. So one key thing here, that get edge config, I've got a little snippet of here in this XML. It's a small config that's really going to supplement the Jabber config that it pulls from TFTP, right? So it's going to, a combination of the config it pulls from TFTP, telling it which call manager subscriber to register to, combined with this edge config allows the client to kind of build the SIP register and all the other SIP messages, stacking up these route headers and allowing the server to get through. One key thing you need to do is when you define the host name and domain name on the Expressway E, you have to put names in there that resolve in public DNS, okay? Typically with the dual NIC deployments, right? The Expressway E may have multiple host names depending upon, it'll be aliased by multiple host names in a lot of cases, right? Whatever goes here makes its way into this edge config that gets served to your clients, and then your clients need to resolve that. If they can't resolve it, Jabber's just going to give one of these messages like can't connect to server. I think that's what you see. Anyway, so this is an important thing to remember. The FQDN needs to be resolved. Now that get edge config that we've been talking about, this is going through that reverse proxy, right? And this is not a general purpose reverse proxy that you can use to enable other things inside your environment. This is specifically for Jabber and the telepresence endpoints, specifically for Cisco collaboration. So this, we'll kind of dissect this get edge config request. You'll see this lovely base 64 encoding, right? So we're base 64 encoding our domain, and then after that we're given a slash and then looking for a resource. In this case, we're showing how we're also, the initial request that comes through will be challenged, and then they'll have to provide username and password credentials, and they'll encode those and then pass them over a secure channel. Now, on the subsequent request, which is typically the home cluster discovery, you'll notice the authentication is now changed. Instead of a base 64 encoded credentials, now we have this XAuth token. So we've authenticated once, we get this XAuth token, and we're going to use that. I believe it's good. The lifetime is 8 hours. The Jabber client will automatically refresh that. But that XAuth token will serve as basically a cookie to get through, right? So all our reverse proxy traffic for MRA is authenticated. That's what we're highlighting here, as well as kind of some of the base 64 encoding. So when you see this in the trace, you have an idea of what's going on. Take that to base64encode.org or something like that. I bookmarked. I go there 12 times a day, I feel like. Good tool for troubleshooting. So again, not a general purpose reverse proxy, Cisco clients only. The cluster user, we'll talk a little more about this later, but this is the UDS API, cluster user, basically helping Jabber clients find where their home cluster is. It's kind of like next generation option 150 kind of proxy TFTP, if you're thinking classic IP phones. What we're highlighting here is between Call Manager 9 and 10, the API responds slightly differently. So don't freak out if your response doesn't look like the 10.0 one if you're on 9. Same content, obviously we're giving more detail in 10.0. So cluster user, I'll come back to this later. It's a real easy thing to test in your browser. Before you get this up and running with even a Jabber client, you can verify your call manager set up right with the home cluster checkbox. Good question. We had a question up here. What is UDS short for? It is a service that runs on all call manager nodes. User data service, I believe is what it is. Hopefully I didn't get that wrong. Another acronym. It is the RESTful API on call manager, right? So CCM CIP, we're starting to move that stuff to a RESTful interface, and UDS is either taking that on with new APIs or starting to support some of the old classic CCM CIP and those other interfaces on top of UDS. So it is, we use it in a number of ways. Jabber uses the heck out of it when you're doing provisioning, especially service discovery and through Expressway for sure. Is there a question here? Yeah. Yeah. So the question was about kind of UDS in the call manager cluster, and it's running. What can you count on? How do we load balance it was kind of the nature of the question. This service runs on all nodes. It's one of the network services, right? So it fires up by default. You don't need to activate it. And the way we're handling it is it's available across every node in the cluster, including the publisher. And the clients basically there's a UDS API that says, what are all the servers in the cluster? And then the client is kind of randomly picking to get a random distribution to load balance it, right? So you don't, as an admin or a partner or someone deploying this, you don't have to worry about load balancing UDS. The clients are all going to do it by themselves, and it's going to run everywhere. You bet. Okay. So let's break down some of the protocols. We talked earlier about kind of what Jabber can do. Now we're going to map those features to a service here, which I'm doing on the far right column. And then you can see how those features are secured and then which protocol they're running over. So of course, we've been doing this for years with VCS and VCS Expressway. SIP in the media, SIP will be secured via TLS, right? And we'll be using port 5061 on Expressway E. I've got all the firewall port details later. All the session establishment, registration, everything you equate with SIP from the kind of a soft phone capability or the telepresence endpoints, we'll be going through that and always secured. This is a key point I want to make. Even if you're not in mixed mode and supporting encrypted device types on Call Manager, once you take that Jabber client or that telepresence endpoint beyond the firewall, it's going to do TLS all day long, right? And you don't need to do anything on the Call Manager side to tell it to do TLS. We don't need to turn on the CTL. We don't need to put the Expressway cert in the CTL or anything like that. By default, it's going to be TLS, and all the media all the way up to the Expressway C is always going to be SRTP, okay? So this is awesome, right? You want to have encryption, especially on the internet, but you don't necessarily want to go to mixed mode and everything, all the joy that brings to your Call Manager environment on top of that, right? So this is a great thing. HTTPS, so this is for login, provisioning, directory search, right? We talked about this, the voicemail access. That's all going over HTTPS 8443. And then TLS, instant messaging and presence is that new capability that we have via XMPP, again, secured via TLS. Here's a question over here. Actually, with MRA, the question was, how far does the SRTP go? It's going to be SRTP all the way to the Expressway C, so all the way till it gets on the inside of your network. Expressway C is going to, if you're going unencrypted, like most of our customers are, on the inside, that's where we do the RTP to SRTP conversion. So heavy crypto, right? And another good reason why you may want to consider using either a virtualized VCS that has the current CPUs that have the AES next instruction set to crypto acceleration versus, say, the old pizza box VCSs that don't have that, right? So it's from a scale perspective, that makes a lot of sense to get the new CPUs on the Expressway C and the E. So SRTP all the way to the Expressway C. It's going to be TLS to the Expressway E. That's the certificate that the Jabber client or the telepresence endpoint gets, is that Expressway E certificate, right? We also, of course, have a different TLS connection between C and E, and then depending upon if you're in mixed mode or not on your Call Manager, either TCP, typically it's going to be TCP, but if you are in mixed mode, then you have the option to go TCP or TLS from the C to the Call Manager. Question here. Is there a known issue with the mobile clients regarding the integrity of the cert chain? Yeah, so we've got a whole section on the question is, what do we need to do from Expressway server certificate perspective to get the mobile clients to trust it? We've got a whole section on that, and I'll cover that. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, we want to have public CA signed certs on that Expressway E. There's a question here. I am not advocating it's better not to do mixed mode. I don't want to force you into mixed mode to enable this feature. At the end of the day, that's what I want to, because there are a lot of folks that, from a troubleshooting and operational perspective, that having SIP in the clear on the inside of the network, assuming they have a secure network, they don't want to enable encryption on SIP for troubleshooting purposes. And at the end of the day, I think there are some other challenges with mixed mode on the inside, just with respect to moving phones between clusters and things like that. I support the security stuff, and I can talk you through if you want to know how to do it, but I don't want to force you to go down that road just to secure this outside traffic. Not true. Not true. You do not need to go to mixed mode. So hopefully there's some other charts in here you can take back and show them specifically that. All right. So a slight wrinkle from this last chart, right? This is on-prem IM&P. Do we have WebEx Messenger customers here? Cool. So in this case, contact search is one of the major things you want to think. All right, it doesn't change. It's always going to the WebEx Messenger cloud for contact search. I've got a couple, next slide I think is about contact search too. And of course your XMPP messaging is still going to the WebEx cloud. So what you guys are getting out of this now is a Jabber client that has a soft phone capability without a VPN, right? You've already had that ability with IM and Presence with Jabber. Now you have the soft phone on top of it. And of course visual voicemail. So contact search, here it is. Jabber's got a lot of options for contact search integration. You'll want to, obviously, as you're probably doing today, get all your contacts into the WebEx Messenger cloud. Jabber's always going to use that, whether it's on-prem or not. Your telepresence endpoints don't know anything about the WebEx Messenger cloud, right? So in that case, you'll want to sync from LDAP or your global catalog into Communications Manager for telepresence endpoints. But for Jabber, WebEx Messenger customers, nothing's really different than what you've been doing for the past couple of years. Now, where it gets interesting is on-prem, right? So not WebEx Messenger, but IM&P on-prem. You typically, the best way to do it, I think, is LDAP sync, right? Get your directory into the call manager database, right? Now, even though your Jabber clients on-prem may be using either EDI or BDI integration and going straight to LDAP for directory sync, as soon, well, and I should mention 9.7 for Jabber Windows brings back the UDS option that disappeared briefly over 9.6. It's back, it's supported. But when this Jabber client goes beyond the firewall, beyond the network perimeter, you don't have to tell it to do anything. It knows it needs to use UDS, right? We don't have an LDAP proxy or anything through Expressway today. So the idea is, to have the best contact search experience, you want to have as many contacts in that call manager database as possible, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have them all, we do have some scale capacities. I think we're at 160K with BU approval. Otherwise, it's 80K end users in the call manager database. Anything else on this one? Any questions on contact search? This is kind of trip people up. Doesn't matter what you put in your service profiles. Jabber's always going to use UDS and connecting over the firewall.
No issue using UDS all the time, like if I want to be inside and outside.
No issue using UDS all the time. There's not. There was a brief period of time where it wasn't supported for the Jabber clients. The feedback was we need to be able to use UDS all the time, and so it's supported now. All right, media path summary. This is always helpful, especially if you're new to the Expressway or stuff. And we talked about this earlier, how signaling and media is always coupled. Question? It's a good question. It's more of a Jabber question, unfortunately. I don't think I can answer here today. I think the idea is if you have someone in your buddy list on Jabber and you are using EDI, specifically EDI, you can pick up that photo, right? And cache it so that when you go beyond the internet, or beyond the internet, Jesus, beyond the firewall onto the internet, you will already have that photo there. If you do a search for someone new that's never in your list, then the idea is you can use that reverse proxy, and as long as you're using the URL substitution, the Jabber client should be able to pick up a new photo that you don't have in your cache from an on-prem web server. That's right, yeah. So if you're outside, you're not going to be able to get to Active Directory photos, that's for sure. I think it's definitely more of a Jabber question. The question is it better to go the URL substitution for photos or to AD? You know, I would say you could use URL substitution, and that gets you the same thing in both places, right? Whether you're inside or outside. But I don't have a best practice as far as what's better. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is around roadmap integration between the Expressway and LDAP, right? There's nothing roadmap today for that I'm aware of with any sort of priority. So, but yeah, I do understand the challenge. Yeah, URL substitution becomes kind of a good way to do that in both places.
Yeah, in a multi-vendor environment and from a migratory perspective, when you have like links, OCS, Edge, and in use cases where you're using a vendor like Nextpoint, I wanted to see, have you guys looked at anything that could be impacted from that perspective?
I think that's a little off track. I can't take it. I can't take that. Let's do it afterwards. That sounds like we're going down the wrong way for right now. All right, media paths, right? Signaling and media is coupled through the Expressway. We got two paths on here, the green and the orange. B2C, two Jabber clients, again, all SRTP, B2C, hairpin through the Expressway C. The C to A case, or the A to C case, right, the green path, again, A is going to be streaming media to the Expressway C, C is going to be streaming it to E. They'll connect through the traversal connection. This is always the case today. The cool thing where we're going, and it's roadmap, I apologize, but we're getting closer with 10.5, gets us another step closer. We need an update from the Jabber clients, and we need another update from the Expressway so that we can optimize that Expressway C out of the media path, right? Once we have those capabilities on those clients, then we'll be able to have ICE support and the potential for direct point-to-point optimized media. It's always a potential with ICE, right? It always depends upon the topology and the NAT and all these other factors. But B2D becomes a direct potential once we get a few more updates. So this will be a great thing, especially when we're talking about telepresence endpoints and endpoints that are pushing high bandwidth, right? Not have to backhaul that all the way through. So that's where we're headed. So clustering. Now this is a little different from kind of the classic VCS control, VCS Expressway, in that in this case the Expressway is almost always used for firewall traversal, whereas VCS control in the past may have been used for a bunch of call controller, session management type capabilities, right? But typically you want to balance the number of Expressway Cs to the number of Expressway Es, right? Because the media and signaling are going to touch both boxes. Key things here, don't mix OVAs in the same cluster. You can do, say, virtual on the inside and appliance on the outside. So a CE 500 corresponds to the medium, right? So you can balance them that way. But don't mix appliance sizes or OVA sizes within a cluster, and keep the distribution between Cs and Es equal. So we can support a lot of integration types with the Expressway and your call manager. Top row here is the most straightforward way. One call manager cluster, one Expressway C, one Expressway E. Basic configuration. You can also have kind of regional edge access. Regional edge, West Coast, regional edge, East Coast, one call manager cluster, for example. You can do that. That's the second row. The inverse, right? Bunch of call manager clusters, two or more. You can do that with one Expressway pair, let's say, the C and the E. And then, of course, the larger deployments, you'll have multiple call manager clusters, multiple edge clusters. So plenty of capabilities. Today we're limited to one domain, right? Which most of communications managers list is limited to one domain today anyways. We are going the direction soon of supporting, multi-domain single tenant, right? So a single tenant that has multiple domains, that's coming soon, official support for that. There's nothing in the GUI today that prevents you from adding other domains. You'll start seeing, TAC is not going to support you likely, but you can try that today and get a sense of what that looks like. All right, so this is a global, we'll take a question here real quick. Yeah, so rich media session licenses are pooled the same way we've pooled like the other traversal licenses in VCS clusters. So, and the idea is you typically want to have the same number per node, right? And then it's pooled across. All right, global deployment. This is what a lot of our large multinational customers look like today with SME, right? We got this SME layer connecting all these leaf clusters from the different parts of the world. So there's a couple aspects of this slide. We'll show you kind of the lack of integration with SME from an Expressway perspective. We'll show you how GeoDNS is used, and we'll also show you how the Expressway C needs to integrate with each leaf cluster. So we're going to drop in edge access around the globe here. We're going to drop in one for each theater here. We'll also use the GeoDNS service. The GeoDNS service allows me to use the same domain across the globe, and then depending upon what your source IP address is, when you request that collab edge SRV, it's going to point you to a different edge. So Jabber in the States, we're always doing the same DNS SRV lookup. In this case, we're going to get resolved to the Expressway in the US. Same thing in Europe, right? Same DNS lookup. In this case, we find the Expressway in the UK. Jabber in Asia Pacific is going to find the Expressway in, it's like Japan is what I was trying to show there. Now, notice the blue lines. These are the SIP trunk integration, right? So SME's always been about SIP trunk aggregation. Everything we're doing from an MRA perspective is SIP line side, okay? It's not trunk, so we don't have the option to go through the SME. We'll have SIP connection directly from that Expressway C to each leaf cluster. So that's a key thing I want to point out. The other thing we'll point out here is when we take this European Jabber client on a business trip to the States, of course it's going to do this. All he needs to know is his domain and his username and password. It's always going to do that same lookup based upon that domain. In this case, he's going to resolve to the Expressway edge in the States, and you'll see the connection now is going to go back to his call manager leaf cluster in Paris, right? So we don't have the concept of, kind of extension mobility for Jabber, right? You're always on one home cluster. And what this is also pointing out is all the Expressway Cs in your environment, assuming you want to enable this type of roaming between edges, all your Expressway Cs are going to have to basically be integrated or discover each leaf cluster, right? Now the good news about that integration is it's pretty straightforward and easy to do, and it's one-sided. You do it on the Expressway C. The call manager, for the most part, it's mostly transparent to the call manager. So there's some things you want to make sure you are not doing on the call manager, but there's not like you have to need to point each call manager to every Expressway. All right, question here.
In that example, when they roam, how does the Expressway know that particular Jabber ID needs to register to the other cluster?
All right, good question. So the European Jabber end user goes to the States, finds its edge via GeoDNS. In this case, the edge is in the States. How does this Expressway C know how to find that home user? So that's the cluster user API in UDS. All right, so this is, again, kind of like the next generation option 150 proxy TFTP. That Expressway C is going to resolve UDS, send that cluster user request to it, and then if wherever UDS SRV resolves to, if it's home there, if the user's home there, they'll say, yes, that's me, send me I'm your home cluster. If it's not home there, it's going to redirect it to the home cluster. And we'll talk a little bit more about that happens. But that becomes an important step and something that's really easy to test in a browser when you're setting up MRA and you have multiple call manager clusters. How am I going to make sure my users get to the right cluster? So there's another question here. Bandwidth control from like a call mission control perspective, still on UCM. Some people have thought about using device mobility, that feature we've had for a long time on Call Manager. There's some options where that makes sense, but to a certain degree, well, and I covered this in a second, that registration from a Call Manager perspective looks like it's coming from the Expressway C, the IP address, right? So you can do device mobility based upon that. You kind of lose device mobility in some respects when you tie it to a stationary Expressway C. So there are some trade-offs. I think it depends upon the deployment type. Jabber, it might make more sense. Telepresence endpoints, I don't know if it makes as much sense from like a date-time group perspective. Setting the time zone. If you've got telepresence endpoints all over the place and you try to use device mobility for date-time group, it's hard to do that with one IP address of the Expressway C or a cluster of IP addresses. So anyways, keep that in mind. It may make sense in your environment. It may not. Sorry, SME is the Session Manager Edition. So this is basically a call manager that just does trunking. You don't have any end users there. We're aggregating trunks or gateways off that. Typically used in environments where you have a lot of clusters and you want to simplify your dial plan. All right, one more. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so question is around domain and we're basically using one domain across the whole environment. You could use different domains if that makes sense. A lot of people just want to have one domain. It's straightforward. But yeah, you could use different domains, and if you have either way you could do it, yeah. Yeah, so each Expressway C needs to be aware of, in this case, since we're going to enable this roaming between edges, you need to be aware of all 9 of these leaf clusters. And that sounds like painful, but it's not too bad, and we'll see that in the configuration setup here. All right, any other questions on the global deployment, kind of, like I said, lack of SME integration or GeoDNS? Cool, there's one here. Yeah, so question was around, can you not do GeoDNS kind of, right? So for certain users or for all users? Yeah, I don't think, yeah, so GeoDNS is not a service provided by Expressway. That's something you would go out and purchase, right, or have facilitated by some other company. And it's going to apply to anyone who does that DNS lookup. The only way to limit users is they would have to use some subdomain, and that would maybe get them out of using GeoDNS or in finding like a regional edge. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. We don't have any way to control that today because Jabber is just relying on DNS. The question was around kind of limiting, a lot of people in one area connecting to a single edge and trying to limit some people. We don't have any way to do that today.
Along those lines, is there any way to restrict users on a call
Yeah. So the question is, do we have any way to set policy on call manager to say this user has edge access and this user doesn't? We don't have that today. And for the most part, that's because we wanted to take this Expressway MRA and make it as backwards compatible as possible. So we were able to go all the way to Call Manager 9.12, right? We were trying for 8.6. We didn't have what we needed there. So we don't have that, obviously this feature didn't exist at that point in time. We are hoping we can add some more policy like edge access, or this user can use Jabber from a certain device type, or things like that, have more granular policy control. We don't have that today. So if an end user is enabled for Jabber on the inside of the network, they can use it on the outside. It is nothing that's committed that I'm aware of today, but it is, and it's more of a communications manager thing than it is an Expressway thing. All right. Oh, I should probably speak to this slide, my favorite slide. No. So CTI phone control, we had questions about this. We don't support it yet. It is something we are looking to do. CAPF, client certificate provisioning. You don't need CAPF for this. If you can use CAPF, but you can't do CAPF over the Expressway traversal connection. Hold on, let me get through this slide, I'm sorry. Jabber file transfer, we're not doing any file transfer. It's not possible unless you're doing WebEx Messenger, all right? And then in that case, of course, it's not really going through Expressway. So we're not doing file transfer over Expressway. For the most part, it's real-time media, and then, some of the HTTP type access. The Jabber mobile features are coming, but today DVOR, some of the handoff stuff or session persistency is not there, but this is something that's high on the priority. One button to push, OBTP, that's what that stands for the telepresence endpoints. That's not something we can do today. We had a question earlier about telepresence endpoint management. You will not have SNMP access or HTTP access or SSH or anything like that to these remote endpoints. ICE, we talked about how that's coming, media path optimization, not here yet. Early media, another one that's kind of painful today, but it will be here soon. And then we have a new TMS phone book option. I think it's Communications Manager 10.5, where Communications Manager endpoints can source TMS phone books, but that's limited to on-prem deployments or connected through a VPN, not yet through MRA. Call recording? I don't think so, no. There's probably a lot of, that list, that's from an Expressway perspective, things we can't do. I'm sure there's others that we can't do. All right, so unbalanced, we used to support this, I guess, a lot with VCS deployments. It's not something that you want to do with Expressway MRA. So you want to have, for every Expressway E cluster, you want to have an Expressway C that goes with it, right? You don't want to have multiple E's going back to one C. So that's one thing that's not going to work well for MRA. The other thing that we used to see in some kind of high security environments are we used to see multiple VCSEs in this kind of chain traversal through several firewalls. You can still do this on Expressway if you're just doing B2B video, but as soon as you want to use some of these unified communications features, this is going to break down. So you don't want to do this if you're doing MRA. All right, so existing VCS customers, this is something that, okay, question. Mm-hmm.
400 or whatever.
Yep.
If I put two and two, would I then get 200 and 800?
Yeah, so the question was around scale within the cluster, right? So if I have one Expressway C and E, medium, OVA, right? I've got 100 video calls, right? If I have two C and E's in a cluster, then I can do 200 video. And it keeps going in a linear fashion until you get up, you can cluster up to 6, but our scale numbers only go up times 4. So that's kind of some weird math, I realize, but there's some history there, I think. So you add up to 4, you get up to 400 video calls with that medium OVA in the cluster. When you go 5 and 6 in the cluster, then you're just adding redundancy.
So if you had, if you do have that server,
Mm-hmm.
and the one that there's a call and it failed, say it's powered down.
Mm-hmm.
Would the backup keep the call up, or would you
Okay, yeah, so the question is you've got an active call going through an Expressway C&E and you have a redundant server. If that one of those expressways goes down during the call, your call is going to fail. It's not going to fail. We don't have any stateful failover today on the expressways. All right, so existing VCS customers. All right, as we've said a couple times today, we'll reaffirm that. You can run MRA on top of existing VCSs. It's great for proof of concepts. If you've already got this box in the DMZ, why not use it, right? There's one thing on here I don't note. If you're using the turn server on VCSE, you'll probably run into some issues with the telepresence endpoints, the TC endpoints, if you're trying to do MRA with them. So we've gone as far as to say, disable the turn server on your VCSE or your Expressway E if you're doing MRA. I think that's just limited to TC endpoints today, but keep that in mind. So why would I stand up another Expressway if I already have VCS in play? Well, I think the biggest reason is scale, right? We talk about telepresence, and a lot of times it's in the tens, hundreds, maybe thousands, right? But typically a lot smaller than the scale we're talking about enabling with Jabber on soft phones, tablets, PCs, Macs. So scale is the primary reason you would deploy Expressway dedicated towards MRA. The difference in security posture, right? Inbound B2B calling, if you guys are allowing that, that's kind of one, it's more of an open door kind of policy, right? Anybody can call you potentially. You're letting that call into your environment, whereas all the MRA access is all authenticated. These are all end users that you've provisioned. So there's definitely a difference there. That's another reason you may want to segregate these into separate boxes. We talked about, scale is definitely the primary reason for sure. At the end of the day, it seems strange to say this, but sometimes it's a lot easier operationally to have the traffic on two different boxes, right? Setting up MRA is pretty damn simple from a dial plan perspective on the Expressway boxes. Working that dial plan, that new dial plan that you're adding in on top of an existing VCS can sometimes be a challenge. So you want to make sure your search rules are prioritized appropriately. Anyway, I like to encourage the separate Expressway. I know a lot of people just want to do it in the same box, and I get that. It depends upon where you are in the market.
What about use and scheduling? I understand we don't support that in Expressway yet.
So scheduled, what's that? You could trunk to an MCU, but it makes sense really to trunk that to Communications Manager instead. So scheduling the same thing, right? The latest TMS release, the latest telepresence server release that just in the past 3 or 4 weeks are now supporting being trunked to Communications Manager. And that's definitely the strategic direction and where you want to go. You wouldn't want to hang it off the Expressway. All right, so let me jump back. So this is that parallel deployment, right? This is, all right, I think I've got too much scale. I want to do a lot of Jabber clients. I don't want to completely overrun my VCS telepresence deployment. I'm doing a bunch of services today in my VCS. You don't have to be doing all these, but these are a number of things that you could be doing, right? That's in the blue box. I'm going to add Expressway C and E, and then since I'm using this collab edge record for MRA, I don't have to worry about an SRV conflict. We're not using underscore SIP or SIP-S, so we don't have any sort of SRV conflicts with MRA. Once I add that, I populate the collab edge SRV record. I then can take all my Jabber registrations inbound through the Expressways. I can also then move, we see we got TC registrations today going to the VCSE. I can move those down onto the Expressway, right? So now I've got all my authenticated, all my remote endpoints coming through Expressway, E and C, back to the Communications Manager. I can keep my existing VCS deployment set up for the telepresence work it's already doing so well today. I don't have to mess with it. All right, so this is what it looks like. There's no conflict in SRV records. It would be my suggestion, let's say. Okay, yeah. So there's what's online? This final build probably you can't see online? Yeah, I'll see if I can get that working. Yeah, that's the problem with the builds and the PDFs is they don't show up. So I'll see if I can publish it. All right, so we talked about a bunch of different options through this last section. If you have AnyConnect today, you can deploy Expressway, obviously. Is Fernando in the house this morning from Cisco? No? He was signed up. He might have partied too hard last night. He and his team are working on Cisco Validated Design for BYOD, right? And it's all about Expressway plus AnyConnect and kind of some details at the bottom of the slide how you do this on your ASA. And the idea is, for the best end user experience, you may want to consider setting up, the split tunneling and denying basically some of the SRV requests through your AnyConnect tunnel, doing that with, policy on the ASA, and keep all your Jabber traffic always going through Expressway. You don't have to do it, but there are some cases where if you're on an active call on some devices and then your VPN fires up, that you're going to drop the call. They've actually done a good job on Jabber mobile clients. I think it actually preserves the call today, but it's not consistent across all the client types. So I think the best practice would be to keep all your Jabber traffic going through Expressway, and that will allow you to have both AnyConnect fired up. And again, going back to that end user experience and making it as dead simple as possible, people don't need to think, oh crap, I don't want to fire up a VPN while I'm on a call, I might lose it. This is the way you guys can make that experience dead simple for them. And his CVD will have all those details. All right, so the configuration, we'll go through this quick. This is the summary of what you need to do. And we've got a new menu, Unified Communications. This is where you turn it on. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to discover your IAM and presence servers, and then you're going to discover your call manager clusters. And the screen captures in a second will kind of show what that looks like. The cool thing, what we're doing with the call manager specifically, is we're going off via Axle, connecting, discovering all the nodes in that cluster, and then auto-generating zones, neighbor zones on the Expressway C, and then search roles on top of that neighbor zones. That makes the dial plan setup on your Expressways dead simple, right? So you basically need to give your publisher, FQDN, username, password, boom, we'll go off and build that for you. After you do that, you add your customer domain, and then you get to the fun part of generating the certificate signing request, getting those certs back on, and then at that point, you can get the traversal connection up, and then you're in business. So let's see what that looks like. So here's this new Unified Communications menu on the C, and the config is mostly on the Expressway C. There are a few things to do on the E. You can see this is kind of the dashboard of setting it up where I'd enable the mode. This is where I'd click to discover my IAM and presence servers, click to discover my communications manager servers and some of the other advanced settings. The Expressway E is simpler, right? All I need to do is turn on the mode, and then once we have that traversal connection up, we'll push the relevant bits over the SIP connection to the Expressway E, tell it what domains it should support, what it needs to look to authenticate against. All right, here it is on the domain on the C. I put my domain in there. I tell it I'm going to do SIP registrations and IAM and presence. If I'm a WebEx Messenger customer, then I don't need the IAM and presence box, right? So I can shut that off. No domain config required on the E. And then this is the lovely traversal client zone that you set up on the C. This is what the config looks like. In 8.2, we're going to simplify this. So if you build a new zone, if you build a zone on 8.2, you can actually select a different type. It'll be the Unified Communications type. And we're going to actually basically just hide a lot of the stuff that you don't need, or we're going to make you set one way anyways. So we're going to simplify that setup for you. This is what it looks like on X81, and this is what it looks like on the E. So this is the traversal server config on the E. This is mostly for your reference when you take it home later. If you're setting this up, you can refer to this. And again, we'll simplify it on the E as well. So we'll have a new type and only really expose the relevant bits that you need to set on the GUI. So the reverse proxy, we've talked about this, what it enables. This is where, well, by default, every call manager node that you discover, and I think I must have missed it, okay. Every call manager node that you discover, we're going to allow UDS API, so TCP 8443. We'll also allow TCP 6970 for TFTP or HTTP more accurately, but to your TFTP servers. So by default, those will be there. All your IMP nodes that you've discovered will allow basically the XCP router-to-router connection, right, on 7400, and also, again, the SOAP API in 8443. So you don't need to do anything there. That's basically what's allowed from a reverse proxy perspective once you discover those nodes. The HTTPS allow list will allow you to, this is where you would drop in your Unity connection servers or the web server that's serving up your contact photos or anything else you're doing with like custom tabs on Jabber for Windows. You could put those destinations here. So anything else, any other traffic through the reverse proxy that you haven't specifically put on the allow list or you've discovered and is allowed by default, all that traffic is not going to get through your edge. Cool. So we have this under the status menu, we have this new unified communications menu here, or page. This is kind of your dashboard once you get everything set up, where you would go to start, and it'll give you the traversal zone status, number of calls, and if you have any issues with your IAM and present servers, they'll actually be highlighted up above. On the bottom, there's two links. The SSH tunnel, that needs to be set up. That'll happen after you get that SIP traversal connection up. So once SIP traversal is working, we get that working mutual TLS, and we've got everything configured like we just went through, then the Expressway E will listen on the certain port, and Expressway C will connect through. That's TCP 2222. And we'll also then fire off the XCP router if you're doing on-prem IM&P. So if you look in the appendix in the back, there's like a little troubleshooting session that kind of starts here. And it shows you what that provisioning session detail looks like. That's a great place to start and seeing if clients are getting through to your Expressway C and E, and if they're able to authenticate. It doesn't necessarily mean that the client's working, but it's a good status checkpoint when you're rolling this out to see how far you've gotten. All right, Communications Manager requirements. So it is mostly transparent to Communications Manager. I've said this a couple times, right? But there are a couple things you want to make sure you don't do to screw things up. So again, SIP line integration versus SIP trunk. We kind of showed that on the SME global slide. You don't need to have a SIP trunk built from Call Manager to your Expressway C. You can, but you don't need it for MRA. If you want to do B2B video, CMR, things like that, Jabber Guest, you absolutely need a SIP trunk in that case. But there's no need if you're just doing MRA to build a trunk. Mentioned this earlier, there's no remote access policy. This is the question the gentleman had in the back. Nothing today on Call Manager, so if you can do Jabber on-prem, you can do it through Expressway. And the last bullet, we mentioned this as well too, but that any endpoints coming in through Expressway are going to look like, on the device page on Call Manager, the phone page, you're going to see that Expressway C IP address. All right, so this is back to that point on the SIP trunk. So no requirement to build that SIP trunk, but if you do, the key is you want on the Call Manager side, you want to listen on a different port other than 5060 or 5061. So SIP trunk security profile, change the port there, associate that profile with the Call Manager trunk, still point it to 5060 or 5061 on the Expressway C. Sorry, on the Call Manager, when you build your trunk, point it to the Expressway C's IP address and port, and it can be 5060 or 5061. But in the other direction, you're going to point at this custom, 5560, something besides 5060 or 5061. So there will be a conflict if you try to do a trunk and MRA on the same port. I think you get back a 405. And typically the Expressway will alarm that, but if it doesn't, make sure, refer back to that slide. So we talked about UDS quite a bit. The key thing for home user discovery is this home cluster checkbox you see on the GUI here we're highlighting. You need to have that check for your end user to be able to, for the UDS API to respond that, yeah, this is where this cluster, or this is the cluster that user is home to. We talked about contact search. For the best experience, you want to have as many users in the cluster as possible. They don't all need to be checked as home cluster users, obviously, but you definitely want to have that check. 80K end users, or up to 160A with the BU approval. So here's that cluster user API, right? So this is a great thing to test in your browser. Just point it at your Call Manager, put a username in there, see if, point it at the Call Manager that he's home to, make sure that is responding appropriately, point it at a different Call Manager cluster, and make sure that you get redirected to the one he's actually home to, and he's not homed at two different places, because that'll really throw things off. So again, this is if you're using, good to check if you're using one cluster, essential if you're doing multiple Call Manager clusters. So one prerequisite to getting this working is setting up ILS, right? ILS was a service we introduced in 9.0 for Call Manager, primarily at that point to replicate SIP URIs between clusters so we could all share a top-level domain. In this case, you don't necessarily need to do anything with SIP URIs. You don't even need to turn that on. I'd love for you to do it. I think it makes a lot of sense. But you do need ILS set up so that if I as a call manager cluster get that cluster user request and that user is not home to my cluster, ILS gives me the ability to reach out, to basically be aware of other clusters in the environment and to reach out and find where to redirect that user to. So anytime you're doing ILS and basically MRA with multiple call manager clusters, you'll want to exchange Tomcat certs between the different clusters. And this is the lovely tool you can do it with if you're not using a common CA to sign all your Tomcat certs. So this is on Communications Manager, OS Admin, the bulk cert management tool. Pretty straightforward to go through and exchange certs. So this is something specific to the telepresence endpoints. Telepresence endpoints, when registered to Communications Manager, are by default going to try to pull clock from those call manager nodes. And we are not doing traversal for NTP over Expressway. So using a date-time group setup for your telepresence endpoints is a good idea, and give them a public NTP reference so that clock doesn't start slipping on the TC endpoints. I don't think it's essential, but you want to give them a good clock to work off. You don't want that to be different than everything else. So keep this in mind for the telepresence endpoints. Jabber clients doesn't apply. So this is the COP file we talked about earlier. You need this today if you're on 912 SU1 or lower. Everything that's in this COP file today will be in the SU2, and it's already in 10.x. So try to give you some, as much as possible to go find this on CCO without giving you a link, but it's pretty straightforward. You guys know where the COP files are. And pretty soon, hopefully, this becomes a thing of the past once you guys get to 912 SU2 or 10, even better. All right, security. If you guys weren't asleep already, let's do it. Let's put you guys to sleep. Nah, just kidding. All right. So firewall port details, great place to start. We've already mentioned no inbound reports need to be open on that internal firewall. The connections from the C to the E are going to be SIP connections, a bunch of media, right? Actually, it'll only be the 36,000 to 36,011. That's only for the large OVA. In the medium and small case, we're only using 2 ports. But I put the worst case up here just because it's always good to go to the firewall guys with the worst case and then not use those ports rather than come back again and ask them for more later. XMPP will be TCP 7400. And then we're passing that, all that HTTPS that we're taking in via the reverse proxy, we're using SSH tunnel on 2222 to get that through. So that's from the C to the E. Inbound, we do need a bunch of ports, specifically media ports, UDP ports, on the E. That's that large range, the 36,002 to basically 60,000. Now that's, again, for the large OVA. That's what you need to be able to do 500 video calls, and there's a lot of different sessions going on when you're doing video with telepresence, right? You've got lots of potential screens, and yeah, you know how that works. But anyways, the TCP ports you need to open inbound, 5061 for your SIP TLS. TCP 8443, that's going to be all the initial connections on HTTPS, and then 5222, that's for IM and P only, so that's your XMPP traffic. There's a great firewall deployment chart in the VCS/Expressway guides that goes over this with a bunch of detail, but this is kind of a one-pager for you. All right, so we did introduce this new large OVA and then the CE1K or 1000. So that's why we expanded this media range, right? Because we used to basically cap off at 100 video calls. We had to bump this up, and we had to move some things around so that we could support the 500 simultaneous per node. So note this. If you're upgrading a VCS, you'll have to go change this manually. Although you may not need to change it, but you have the option to change it if you want things to align across the board. One thing we did also, if you're upgrading from VCS, is we changed, we removed this option for the traversal ports. I think we're actually going to bring this back because it's presented a couple challenges for migrations. So it's not an X81. You can see we're using the first 2 ports of the of the media range, or on the large, we're using the first 12 ports. So I think this is going to come back and be configurable just to help with migration scenarios.
Do you have to expressly punch the media ports through? I mean, is that something where, the firewall, if it's where it will allow that through without having to expressly allow those media ports?
Good question, yeah. So do we need to open these media ports? Or if we have a SIP-aware firewall, can we have that take care of it for us? The fact that we're doing everything over TLS is going to not expose those media ports to the firewall. So SIP inspection, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't help us in that case. So you'll definitely want to allow those UDP ports on the firewall. All right, what's next? So we have several connections from the client to the edge. For the most part today, it's username and password. There's a big SAML SSO push kind of across all of Cisco collaboration. That's going to deliver a lot more authentication options via your identity provider. Today, HTTPS will start off being basic web auth, and then we'll turn into your cookie, XAuth cookie. We talked about this earlier. SIP is going to be username and password digest authentication, but again, digest authentication that you don't need to set up on Call Manager, right? There's always been that option. You don't need to set that up. It's basically transparent to the Call Manager. It'll be digest between the client and the edge, and the client will know to use the same credentials that it used for the initial login for the digest password. Edge server authentication. All right, this is key, right? Oh, there's a question. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's going to register, it's going to authenticate all the way through to Call Manager, right? The question is, where do I monitor for brute force type attacks? We also have this VCS, it's a feature that you can use on VCSs or Expressway. It's an automated detection feature that basically you can set a trigger level for a number of, once you hit a number of failed authentications, to basically blacklist that source IP for X number of minutes, and that's configurable. So that's another way you can do it. It's not an end-all be-all solution, because if you're using a bunch of proxies on the internet, one source IP doesn't help you. So that's something you can do, and then you can monitor those brute forces on the Expressway itself, those brute force type attacks. But otherwise, like your IMS logs on Call Manager would be a good place to look. Okay. So edge server authentication. So we talked about not requiring the CTL, not requiring the Expressway cert in the CTL or anything like that, right? So we have gone to a mode where we're going to require you to have the Expressway E certificate signed by a public CA, right? And then that, required definitely for the telepresence endpoints. I mean, if you want cert warnings to pop on your Jabber client, you don't have to have it signed. That's not exactly a great user experience to give to your end users. So that's why I say we require you to do it with the public CA signed cert. The clients are then going to rely on their underlying platform and what certificates are trusted there to authenticate that Expressway server certificate. No wildcard cert support across any of the Cisco collaboration stuff. It's not. We're using subject alternate names kind of as the approach. We don't feel that wildcard is something, a direction we want to go. You can use SAN certs, get a bunch of host names and options in there, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that's the direction for both Expressway and Communications Manager. Who said that? They're crazy. It's not coming. 10.5 is where subject alternate names come into Communications Manager, and actually we've totally updated the whole certificate sign and request thing there, so you can get more than 2 SANs in. You can get a bunch of SANs in 10.5, but it's not wildcard cert. You can then share that Tomcat cert across the Call Manager and IM&P cluster, but it's not a wildcard. You can probably put a wildcard in there. I don't think you can, actually. Yeah, I wouldn't go down the wildcard road. I would stick with the SAN, get a bunch of host names in there, and go that approach. All right. Some more on server certificates. So if that security wasn't enough to put you to sleep, this stuff certainly will, unless my sexy X509 word art here brings you back. Here we go. So, bunch of stuff here, but this is important. Certs and DNS are the stumbling blocks, right, for setting this up, quite honestly. The config on the Expressway is not that bad. This is where people get tripped up. All right, Expressway E-cert, signed by a public CA. Expressway C, it can be a public CA or it can be an internal CA, right? The idea here is it doesn't need to be, it needs to be trusted, but it doesn't need to be trusted by every mobile device and Jabber client out there, right? Because we don't establish any TLS connections with the Expressway C server. We do stream media directly there, but there's no TLS handshake in that case, right? So you have some options for the Expressway C of who signs that. You need to have client and server authentication, X509 usage in the cert, and that basically allows server-to-server communication, which is important for any sort of traversal connection. Again, no requirement for the CTL, no wildcard support, and don't try to upload a stack cert. That'll just make life miserable for you. So you have to extract and have just that, just the signed cert uploaded to the Expressway, and then take the CA and upload that as a trusted CA cert. Question here.
So does the client need to trust the Expressway C?
The Expressway C does not need to be trusted by the client, right? Because we never do a TLS connection to the Expressway C. It needs to be trusted by the Expressway E, but not the clients. All right, so this is what it looks like. Even if you're starting off with a single node Expressway cluster, set a cluster name, and then once you have a cluster name, then you have an option to put that cluster name in the CSR, and that'll make life better for you down the road when you add another node. You don't have to redo the cert on the old one. Then you want to build when you build your Expressway E traversal server zone, then that cluster name is what you're going to verify, and that needs to be then on every cert in the Expressway C, so we can do a mutual TLS connection between the C and the E. So always put the cluster name in, get that started, even before you generate certs. All right, now specifically on the Expressway E, we need to have the domain that we're doing service discovery with as a SAN. So in this case, we're using UC Demo Lab, right? We need to have that as a SAN in the Expressway E cert. You don't need it on the C, but we need it on the E. And think of it this way. When you type in a browser a name, and you're connecting something via HTTPS, the browser is going to bark at you and warn you if the name that you type in doesn't match any names in the web server certificate, right? So similarly, when you fire up Jabber, the first thing you do is you can just put a username at domain. If that domain is not returned in that Expressway E certificate, Jabber is going to bark at you, right? So the same thing. Don't need it again. Don't need it on the C. You'll find the same kind of requirements on the Tomcat certs, right? When you're doing discovery on the inside of the network. All right. What am I saying here about mixed mode? So if you are doing mixed mode, and again, to whoever was confused, you don't have to do mixed mode. But if you are, any of those endpoints that are remote, right, call manager is going to expect a certificate when it tries to register. Now, when Expressway C is registering kind of on behalf of that remote endpoint, you need to have a name in there that call manager can match on to know that, yeah, this is the actual identity of someone I authorized to connect to. So it's kind of a hokey today, but the way you do that today is you need to put a SAN in the cert, and it doesn't have to be an FQDN, but typically when you're getting cert signed, FQDN names are a lot easier to get signed than just plain old names, right? That name is then going to need to match the phone security profile, phone security profile name. So similar to what we do with the SIP trunk. In the SIP trunk case, we have a specific box that has the X509 subject name, right? We don't have that on the phones, so this is why we have to match the name to a SAN.
That's only if you're doing TLS all the way back.
Exactly. So only if you're in mixed mode and doing TLS basically end to end.
And then back on the Expressway SAN cert, would you suggest a UCC cert for that with multiple SANs?
Yeah.
That just has the domain and then your server? I've seen some issues with just having just one of those in there, like standard SSL cert, it fails, it whacks off the back of the domain.
Well, you can go with the UCC cert, right? But the subject name, you probably want to have like your Expressway cluster name as the subject name, and then have the domain, as a SAN. as a SAN, not the subject.
Your communication manager, which is not local on the inside.
Oh, God. Sorry.
And obviously UCC certs, they're getting away from that, and they're packing it out local at the end of next year or something.
Yeah.
Is that going to cause issues with that not being in there to software registration?
So if you're .local on the inside,
Communication manager, but your JIT on your Java domain is a .com.
yeah, sure. Well, it may impact Jabber on the inside of the network. If you have a .local call manager, you'll need to, if Jabber is discovering via like a .com domain, you need to have that .com in the .local cert too, which kind of is anti what you're trying to do in the first place, right, with the .local. But yeah, if you're using .local on the inside, from an Expressway, Jabber client to Expressway, it's only going to see that Expressway E certificate, right? But you may have other challenges when you're on the inside of the network. Well, TLS for the soft phone is SIP, right? And the SIP is the call manager certificate, and we never verify that against like the platform trust. We always verify that against the CTL, right? So you're not going to be doing TLS soft phone unless you're in mixed mode and then you have a CTL, and that's how you verify that connection. Okay, one question here. Sorry, I got to get going. What's it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're doing Jabber mixed mode, you're going to have a phone security profile associated with Jabber, and that name needs to match something in the Expressway C cert. Sound good? Cool. Sorry, I'm accelerating here because we are nearly at the end. So another optional SAN to think about where you're doing XMPP federation very soon with Expressway. You don't have to do this, but if you want to do TLS federation to your IAM and presence server with persistent or chat rooms, this is something we're giving you the option to put in your cert today, so that when we have this new feature in a couple months' time, you don't have to regenerate your certs. Okay, so here's the detail. It's completely optional for MRA. This is how you generate the CSR. This is a good reference to see what I did. The Expressway E generating the CSR, this is where you see that domain that we've been highlighting. You make sure you get that as a SAN in the cert as well. On the Expressway trusted certificates, Expressway doesn't come with any trusted CAs anymore. VCS used to. You might want to purge those out. There's some old invalid certs at this point if you're upgrading, but we're no longer bringing those forward. Here's the chart of what you need depending upon your setup, what certs you need in each place as far as trusted CAs. Okay, so you always need to trust on the Expressway C and E each other's CA to get that mutual TLS connection up. The other ones are optional. There are some details about what you need on the Expressway C. All right, we are nearly at the end. Start on solid ground. Before you do Edge, get Jabber working on-prem service discovery without Expressway. And what I mean by working with service discovery is just typing in your user at domain and discovering call manager, getting that all working, and then add your Expressway and then try to register over the Edge. So that's a key thing, right? I try to help a bunch of people with Expressway challenges, and then turns out that it's not even working on-prem. So start there. That's a great place to start. We talked about using the cluster user API. Do that in your browser. It's a great, easy way to test. Don't forget about DNS, right? It's critical for Jabber service discovery to have this kind of split DNS requirements between internal and external. Common domain really simplifies things. I know you guys don't typically, when you go to add a feature, don't have the ability to change DNS at a company, but anyways, think about DNS. It's very key to Jabber. Know the TCP and UDP port requirements and how they've changed from the past. And then, again, certificates have been a stumbling block. Verify, refer back to these slides, tell you what you need to put in there, what's required. It's optional now. And then when you take your certs, CSRs to the CA, when you get the cert back, make sure it matches what you requested. A lot of times the CAs are going to strike out those SANs and then make you put them in the browser step by step, in a web form so that they can monetize each of those names. All right? Keep that in mind. A lot of times there's been a couple CAs that I know won't give you web server authentication unless you get the next step up in their cert. It's not really across the board, but Make sure you have both the TLS client and web server authentication set. Boom, Expressway is here. This is the key takeaway. It's available today. We have a bunch of clients supported. It's awesome. We have a lot of happy customers using it. We got a few people trying to scratch their head and figure out how to set it up. But hopefully this session has been helpful to you guys and will enable you to do this in the field. No cost, you saw this. It's a secure access alternative to VPN. VPN doesn't go away. It's a complimentary offer. Again, you guys know the difference between the Expressway series now and the VCS series. Hopefully that's clear. And that's it. We did a bunch of Q&A. I'll probably hang out afterwards outside. But it's been great talking to you guys this morning. Thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for coming in at 8. Do your sessions.